And yeah, well, hi everyone. It's so great to meet you all. Of course, coming from Los Angeles, California. Fun fact: I actually was telling one of my best friends in London that this is normal time for us. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today. Thank you so much again for being here today. I wanted to really take the time to, yeah, just really introduce myself, but also for you all to kind of leave this presentation not so much feeling inspired, but understanding the endless opportunities and possibilities that your work can be done within environmental industries, and just recognizing that you are all at a very pivotal moment in your life, especially being in, I guess we call it here in the US undergrad, but I'm not sure if it's called undergrad and uni, or maybe it's called uni. But please, make sure to have open minds, but also ask any questions about careers or life or activism after this presentation. It's going to be a very open ended source on that, and so don't worry about that. So just to kind of little give more introduction is I am an environmentalist and creative today. Many of you, or not many of you, actually, some of you may have heard of my work called Queer Brown Vegan. It's an independent media platform that I created back in 2019 as a way to really promote environmental literacy online. But prior than that, I have other experiences and stories that I'll get into throughout this presentation, because I think sometimes people forget of the work that it's been done beforehand before I entered this, social media sphere or the media landscape on that end. So to get started, I always love to share this. I want you all to comment of what your fighter is because I want you to remember who you are throughout this presentation. Personally, myself, I see myself as the little one on the second row. The first image says Cuba will die first if things get real. I think that is very important for all of us to understand that we have different roles and characteristics that we play here in the environmental movement or climate movement or your curiosity to being in sustainability. And it's so important that we understand that, that we take some time to actually express our joy and laughter through these memes. But we're going to get into the real presentation starting now. So when people ask me, what does it mean to be an environmentalist? I usually share this story around environmentalism. So for many of you here, if I asked you, can you name five Black environmentalists or five Indigenous environmentalists, or five POC environmentalists, sometimes it can be hard for people to understand or to name those people. But if I asked you, can you name some environmentalists, your heads easily go to Jane Goodall, David Attenborough, Greta Thunberg, who are all amazing environmentalists. Do not get me wrong. I'm not trying to discredit any of their work, but it's to kind of to showcase the media bias that we have towards whiteness in this environmental media space. When I was a young kid, I remember being inspired by a lot of TV shows on like Nat Geo and Discovery Channel. And I remember never really seeing myself on media or TV. And when I was a very young kid, I remember my mom messed up my bangs. I'll never forgive her for that. But I share this photo because I was a kid that grew up in Los Angeles, California. My parents had immigrated to Mexico, and growing up in poverty, I always tell people that poverty really shapes the ability and resources that you have to not only believe in yourself, but to also flourish. And I remember just understanding at a very young age, living in affordable housing. Here in the United States, we call them food stamps. I'm not sure in the UK how they're called, but we use food stamps as like subsidized, vouchers for food. And just really understanding the ways that I had to navigate the world. And I remember growing up with my older brother and older sister and how much we really relied on survivability as sustainability. So like a really good example of this is that I think by the time I believe like 8 or 9 or 10, I was already using the public school bus, which, I'll tell you all, our public transportation in the United States is horrible. Whenever I go to London, I say it's so much better than the US. But in Los Angeles, I took the public school, public, not the public school, but the public metro that was basically going into schools. And I remember at a very young age living nearby toxic factories and really normalizing that as my environment. And so when I would watch these TV shows of these amazing conservationists, environmentalists traveling the world, they were typically white, and they were typically white and men, but I was also very fascinated of like, wow, these are the true environmentalists. These are true people who are doing the work. They're the ones who have done all the work to be able to be recognized. But then I realized more and more like how much of a disadvantage a lot of people of color are at a very young age. And so when if you were to ask me as a young kid, like what were my passions and dreams, to be honest, I don't think I had that many dreams as someone that grew up poor. I think the main dream that I had as an immigrant was I need to do well in society in order to take care of my family. A lot of the times in America, we talk about this concept around generational wealth and making it. And my parents really instilled this framework or this idea that, immigrants need to work hard in order to thrive in society, get a 4-year college degree, and then you're flourishing. But that wasn't so much the case for me. I think that I didn't really want to adopt that narrative myself. And I think my true passions around environmentalism really came from the fact that I saw this I saw environmentalism as a museum. I saw it as a curiosity. I didn't really understand what it really meant to me. I didn't identify with the word. I really just showcased myself through the embodiment of my actions. And I talk a lot about how sustainability today is seen as this like really wide range of lifestyle values, whether that's someone who is car free, whether that's someone who's vegan, whether that's someone who's plastic free, whether that's someone who gardens. And I think they're all amazing. But I think that for a lot of poor Black Indigenous people of color, there is this notion that our embodiments of what we used to do in order to survive is seen as a poor thing, or it's seen as a dirty thing. And I use this really great example where I remember even in class of how media bias works towards Black and brown people of color, where there was in the United States, dumpster diving is illegal in, I believe, in majority of the states here. I'm not sure about the UK, but there was a diagram that showcased how there was a picture of a white man doing dumpster diving. He's seen as a food waste hero. And on the right side, there's a picture of a Black and I believe in a brown person, and they were seen as quote unquote homeless person, scavenging for food. And I just had to note how the ways that Black and brown people of color are not just demonized online, but how they're demonized through the ways that we learn through our educational systems. And so I think for me, I really wanted to unpack a lot of why is it that we see certain people as heroes but other people as villains. And I kind of want to take some time of understanding like the concept around ecological wealth, right? Like to me, the idea of ecological wealth stems from the additional of generational wealth of understanding that we have really lost ecological knowledge or the continued relationships of the fungi, fauna, flora. And during this time with capitalism and what we're seeing today of mass overconsumption, we're seeing the humanizations of non-human logos. And to me, it's very dangerous when I think we're dealing with these large multinational corporations that have control of supply chains, have control of workforce, and really undermine the plight of labor unions and also environmental concerns and human rights conditions and animal rights conditions of the ways that they're operating. And the reason for this diagram actually was shown from a teacher back years ago that he did this demo on students, and it actually showcased that a majority of the students were valuing the brands on the left. They knew all of them, but the ones on the right, they could only identify one or two, right? If you got the maple leaf wrong, please let me know. But I think that it is important for us to really understand like what is it that our society today is valuing. And I see why so many people, especially I've seen this with like a lot of my peers, is that they have devalued a lot of the ancestral knowledge that our parents and our grandparents and our great great grandparents had. Is that how they were living, how they valued those ecological species was very rooted in reverence rather than this extractive mindset that we have today. And a really great example of this too is like I talk about when I was doing environmental science, we learned a lot about how to use sustainably forest or manage a forest or a fisheries. And when I was learning more about flora, fungi, and fauna and how they're all symbiotic relationships through a science mechanism in undergrad, I remember just telling my friend on the left and right of me, and I said, wait, how is it that we're learning to be environmental scientists when they are literally teaching us how to profit off of natural resources under the guise of environmental economics? And I felt very, very defeated in these industries, mainly because one is that is there truly a quote unquote sustainable way to harvest a forest that is not going to regrow at its same conditions that it is today because of our atmospheric conditions and the loss of biodiversity in those areas? Or are we going to actually tell ourselves that we have to really redesign the economic models to find different alternatives? And the other thing I always share about too is that from the fishery standpoint is that they use this model called optimal sustainable yield, or OSY. There's a lot of calculus that goes into this, but it was very interesting when I learned about it because basically these models that are developed by large industrial aquaculture industries is that they capture these fishes, right? These living beings, I would say, and they capture them, but they account for what's in there, but they don't count the quote unquote bycatch or the other species that are actually contributing to that ecosystem. And there's no true measurements of how much is actually being lost of eco species within those industries. And I felt very defeated from the animal aspect, but from the human aspect, when I learned more about how children are forced into industrial agriculture or aquaculture in slavery, I was very defeated about these industries are unsustainable, yet these kids are having to work in these industries due to being deprived in their countries from economic conditions due to neoliberal policies that were passed by global north governments. And so there was a really way for me to combine my knowledge for history and education with the current conditions of environmental science models, and how do I really challenge the praxis of power and balance on that end. And so I'd say that when we get into younger youth climate movements today, is, my gateway into youth climate activism actually wasn't this. I tell people that my early days of youth climate activism, and this is, I'm older than you all, but this is maybe back in the 2010s, is that I was a young high school student who learned about the term environmental justice, and I was just volunteering at this environmental justice organization in my neighborhood, and I was doing language translation to get people to vote for petitions locally to ensure that their voice was being heard in local council. And so I think that is very interesting to me today, seeing the youth climate movement today be very popularized in media. Is that one, I think that a lot of young people today, and like you all that I'm talking to you, have lost a lot of their youth. I talk to young people today in different states and different colleges and universities and countries, and I'm so thankful to see the younger people today knowing so much knowledge that I didn't really have access to, nor did I really understand until later in my adult years. But I'm also disappointed in older generations for not being able to really facilitate and to really teach younger people and fight for their future, because so many young people today feel powerless, right? And I think that the youth climate movement in the United States and also the United Kingdom are interconnected, right? I think there's a lot of things that are happening in the youth climate justice space where it is very sad to see how many people have lost their lives and how many people have almost, in certain aspects, I see sometimes those who I've mentored, like, have lost or have lost to the ability to sometimes find fun or have joy or to take a day off of activism, and to really just understand you resting does not mean that. And I think that there's this very sometimes purist mindset of absolute mindset or altruistic behavior that can sometimes happen when I think that it's not that younger people don't know how to decide, but what I'm saying is that we have to be able to embrace nuance and multi-dimensional perspectives in these spaces. And I think that when I was younger, I also had this very different mentality in my college years, and I had to be challenged, and I had to definitely have uncomfortable conversations of what it means to center and decenter yourself at the same time. But from that, I learned about, in college, about eco anxiety. And I'm not going to really name the facts here, but I think that when I read this study about seeing half of young people think that humanity is doomed, I I realize it's not a rare thing. I think that a lot of us here in this webinar, we feel a sense of powerlessness. We feel a sense of loneliness. A lot of us find it difficult to find friends. A lot of us find it difficult to connect with people. A lot of us find it hard to just actively do acts of care in our relationships. And I think that's because of isolation, that was because of the pandemic, that's because of the lack of funding that's going towards young people. There's a lot that we can say from via design, but I think that it's important to understand that, one day I was talking to some students at a university, and they told me that that no one ever wants to build a movement with them, or no one wants to talk to them. And I felt very broken. Is that I think that we can sometimes be so stuck in our silos that I think that it's important for us to understand that there's people coming in different spaces, in different knowledge capacities. And I think, one of my biggest fears when I was in college about joining youth climate justice spaces specifically is that I felt that I was being tested on the ability of how well I knew about a term versus how well I knew how to show up and actually embody the actions. And to me, that was really my focus, is that I don't have the literacy, I don't have the theory of change or how to talk about radicalness, but what I do have is the acts and embodiments. And often I poke fun at my friends on this, is that, during our time as young climate activists too, is that I would see people talk about all this radical language, and yet when it came to their actions or their embodiments, it reflected the complete opposite behavior. And I said, I think that there's some people that are very good at learning theory, but they're not good at learning the practice. And so I think that, when we're nurturing ourselves and trying to find community, I think the biggest thing that young people face today is that it's really hard to find events or areas to connect with people with. Um, and when I was a university student, this is when I think I was 18 or 19. I was at UC Berkeley studying environmental science, and just kind of a brief background of that information is that when I was in high school, a lot of my professors or teachers, I would say, were telling me like you should apply to certain schools, and so I wasn't actually supposed to apply to Berkeley because I was seen as this top institution, and I didn't really have a high grade, and I just didn't feel smart enough to be there. But my brother anyways paid for the application, and I ended up getting in. So I ended up going, and I remember, during this time is a very unique time where it was 2014, 2015. It's that climate was becoming more popularized in some ways, and I was learning a lot in my environmental science classes. But I had this huge disconnection of like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do right now? What am I like? What am I supposed to do other than just learn? And I think that while I was attending a lot of youth climate protests and learning and understanding of what was happening, I also was going through a lot as a young person. A lot of because I grew up in poverty, because I had to, work hard to afford my education. I also had multiple jobs during this time. One thing I don't really talk about is like how class privilege really affects the ways that we understand environmentalists. Is that some of my friends who studied environmental science had their whole school education paid for them. Their parents, you know, gave them a lot of money to study and to always rest. And I feel that other environmentalists like myself that grew up in poverty, I didn't have access to call my parents to ask for funding or resources. I just had to figure it out. And I think that, to me, I think the other thing is about being a queer environmentalist in these spaces is that when I entered these classrooms, I never saw myself. So can you imagine I was 18, 19 walking in these rooms, and then I sit down in a classroom with all white students, you tend to really then doubt yourself again to feel like I don't feel good enough. And when you have professors who don't look like you, nor the grad students that don't look like you already feel like, okay, I'm definitely not smart enough, and two, I should not be in this space. And so I don't think that people recognize why diversity matters. Like to me, diversity matters not just because it allows us to challenge our behaviors and our mindsets, but it also allows us to feel seen and feel alive. There were so many moments in undergrad where I tell people that I was discredited in my own knowledge, is that my lived experiences were not seen as, doc scientific enough. It was just seen as like that's just a poor thing. And so I recognized that I had to really showcase my experience and to understand the Western science models of these things. And I tell people that, I don't think that you need an environmental degree to be an environmentalist. But when I was younger, like 17, I had this assumption that in order to be an environmentalist, in order to be respected, you need an environmental science degree. And it's funny today because I think that a lot of people, sometimes call me eco influencer without recognizing that I have established research in environmental science. I've done the major. I also worked a lot doing other things background. I think it's very easy for sometimes people in media to just prescribe me as this like influencer person that just came out of nowhere. But it's like actually I came from the grassroots. I came from the community. And just because I never put it out there or documented it online because I wanted my privacy at the time, I was actually very anti social media. Is that when the years from 18 to 22, I actually did not use social media. I had my personal account, but it was private, never posted it to anyone. And I can't tell you all that what really got me through my university studies was actually community. It was people who looked like me. I don't know if you all know, but there's this creator called Brown Girl Green on Instagram, and she's actually one of my best friends that also went to college. She does a lot of amazing work, but I think that I had to find people who were Black, Indigenous, people of color who looked like me that we can actually relate to in our experiences talking about environmentalism, because it almost seemed that whenever we complain, quote unquote, that we were seen as a nuisance, that we were seen as being divisive. But a lot of us just wanted to be heard is that, hey, like, did this professor say this microaggression towards you? And a lot of us would be like, yeah, they also said that to me. I found this space of that. One of those organizations I actually was involved with, it was called Students of Color's Environmental Collective at UC Berkeley. And when I think I was either 20 at this time, we did this action where we called out our university to understand like where were the professors of color. If you could see there, there's a picture of all the professors that they have hired, and very few were people of color. Actually, I think that like in our study that we did, it was like less than 1% actually were people of color. And so we demanded our department in the natural resource department to recognize that one, there's a diversity issue, but two, that people of color that are students don't feel safe in these spaces, and three, that the university implement safe strategies to ensure that. And one of the reasons why I love this organization, for any POC out there, is that it was one of the very first few collectives established on university campuses that were founded by activists, students, and advocates that wanted diversity in academic spaces. And through that systemic change in my younger years, we were able to develop a mentorship program that basically got every young person matched up with a environmentalist professional of color in the industry. And then two is that we got funding as a youth collective to actually pay young people for their work. So I actually was one of the people that helped alongside the collective of 10 people to write the grant. And we won, I think, like 50 or 100,000 USD for this grant that lasted 2 years. But unfortunately, I didn't get benefit of it because I graduated by that time. But, the university also agreed to create an agreement in diversity. And, when people ask me about local action, I didn't see that as local action, nor did I see that as systemic action. I think I just saw it as like, this is my legacy I want to give to younger people so they don't suffer the same things I had to go through. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities that, can be modeled in these like grassroots activist spaces for young people of how you can also build that. But this is more obviously like, my younger years before I've gotten more into the career I have today. But I think that is super important for every environmentalist here is that you support yourself, that people who see you flourish, that want to see you win. I can't tell you that, I think that a lot of university students always share this is that it's not the institution that helped you get through, it was the people that were in that institution that helped you get through that other end. And I'm so grateful for this collective that I was in because even to this day, I mentor a lot of the young people, and they still reach out to me and they remember me. And it's so great to see young people that are entering my university and my alumni university for me to extend my arms to them to say like this is what I did to get through this. So it's super important to create that intergenerational leadership, and especially for young people here today too, is that there's probably younger teenagers and kids that are looking up to you too, and you need to be able to extend that solidarity on that end. And your community doesn't need to be global either. It can be very small and secular. And that's something that I always remember, is that these are my community that I serve, and these are the people who know me and see me through that work. And I think that what we recognize too in this collective is that, young people really do need investments in their skills. Like there needs to be some monetary compensation through that. And there needs to be policy shift that to create young opportunities. And we need to also be able to disrupt those capital flows that can actually be more equitable for young people. And I think that takes a lot of courage, but that also takes a lot of movement towards that on that end. But moving forward, I think that people now, looking into my career I have today, is like, what happened after you graduated college? So I'll be more personal here. So I hope you all can take it with a grain of salt, whatever you want. But after college, I graduated with environmental science, as I mentioned, and I applied to all the environmental NGOs. I share this because I know I'm not embarrassed by it, but I applied to all the environmental nonprofits from Greenpeace. I'm trying to think of all the UK nonprofits, but anyways, here in the US, there's the Nature Conservancy, WWF, NRDC, 350 org. I applied to all the top US climate organizations that operate here. And throughout all the interviews, I got rejected, and they told me that I didn't have good climate work documented. And I was very surprised by that, because I said, what is good climate work? Like, am I supposed to showcase all the accolades I got? Like, I don't like that. I think that's very weird. And so, anyways, I went through these final interviews and they all said no. And it was funny because there was one job that led me to like 4 interviews, and then they told me no. And I was like, are you serious? So I was so desperate that I gave up in the environmental industry. I actually said, you know what? Maybe I'm not meant to be an environmentalist. And so I moved to New York City and I got a job at a fashion agency. I was a talent manager and also a recruiter. So I did a lot of contracts, but also recruited a lot of people into the agency. And it was really fun. My first 2 years working in fashion in New York City, I got to learn a lot about brand building, storytelling, and really was just in a different audience. And while I think that it was fun from the outside to see that my friends were like, wow, you work there, inside I was really stressed and I was really tired. I tell people this, that when I was first 2 years post grad out of work, I told my friends I just need to work in the environmental industry. I'm wasting my degree. And I think that part of me felt guilty that I couldn't get an environmental job, that I felt like, oh, I'm not good enough to be in the environmental space again. That I then went to this conference in New York City, and I remember that I was hearing these panelists speak, and then I spoke at it. And someone after the audience came up to me and they said, why don't you talk about this online? And I said, oh, well, I don't believe in social media because my activist friends say that, if you put yourself on social media, then you're performative. And they were just like, well, if you are performative, it'll show. But if you're not, like, why does that matter if you're just teaching yourself and others? And I don't know whose mic is on, but if you can mute it, thank you. But anyways, I think that it was really important for me to kind of recognize that like there was potential there. And so I just had this idea on the subway in New York City that like I'm just gonna create this environmental account that's focused on, environmental education. But I think it's important for young people to understand, like, when you're building something, you have to understand like what is your why, right? I found really great factoids from the Global Pearson's Learning Survey that in America ourselves, 2 in 3 Americans and 3 in 4 people globally are actually rushing to learn about climate change, because a lot of them agreed that they didn't learn about it in school. There's this fun joke that a lot of my friends now are lawyers and are going to become doctors now. They are telling me how they believe in climate change, but they don't really know much else after that. And so I think that it's important for us to understand, like, this is a really good information to understand, like, this helps legitimize the reason why I'm entering this media space. Fun fact is that today in 2024, or this is actually from 2022 or 2021, is that the top 3 sources where people actually learn about climate issues are media, which is like traditional journalism and other outlets, social media, which is like 1/4. And that makes sense because TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, like they're all large platforms that people tune into. And then we have TVs and films, which is 22%, which of course that's not always accurate because a lot of TVs and films don't really talk about climate change. They maybe mention it a bit, but they don't really like gloss over it or go in depth. So I think it's important to understand like these factoids were helping me understand like, yeah, actually there are a lot of people who are trying to learn from different sources of media. And so the work I approach today is, first of all, I'm a huge forager, so I made this like mushroom ring one day. But it's to reimagine interrogation into education. Is that when I was younger, I didn't start this work until I was fully 23 online. So I think people sometimes think I started it when I was 18 or 19, but that's not true. I really was tired of seeing within activist spaces and also even professional adult spaces of like people wanting to interrogate you for not knowing something, or why aren't you vegan, or why aren't you this, and it's like I really just was so tired of that behavior, and I really wanted to provide education. And I think there's really good psychological facts and studies that have been out there is that if you scream at someone to do it, they're more likely not to adopt that but habit or behavior. Instead, you have to inspire them through storytelling. And I think for me, that's really been the groundwork of my mission, is that I really wanted to showcase people like the endless possibilities that they have in order to educate but empower themselves, but also to unlearn and relearn. Is that it's not about regurgitating the same information and making yourself an expert. It's actually sitting down and challenging your thoughts and asking yourself like what is your truth versus my truth, right? My truth may be different from your truth. And I think I've had to become more comfortable with that, with select few individuals in these spaces. And so I think that like my mission today, back in 2019, is that I had very cheap photographic skills before I had a graphic designer on my team. But anyways, I think that that was really important for me to build out this platform, is that I really just wanted to focus on environmental education. So I started off using infographics very much in the early days. I just would talk about topics that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to share about my lived experiences as a brown environmentalist. And I just wanted to hopefully not inspire, but hopefully just kind of give people the truth about like, this is what I've been going through in my career and industry. Obviously, years later, right, the brand evolved and we got more serious about how we wanted to do that. One thing that we actually identified in our work is that I think that we're past the problem identification era. I think that a lot of young people today are very like young people involved in climate, I would say, are very much knowledgeable now of like these are the fast fashion industries that are evil. These are the this is greenwashing. This is what, it's happening. This is blah blah blah, like problem, 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 problem. And I think for me, I think about it now through solutions-based education, is that I worked with the Solutions Journalism Network and a PhD scholar on understanding of like what's actually going to resonate with young people today. And we figured that like a lot of my audience were just like, I'm tired of hearing the same issue. I really want to just learn about local solutions happening on the ground. And it was very cool to be able to present this content, to really shift the content ideas. Is that my inspiration to create infographics actually came from when I was in college. I used to color code my notes. I used to make them colorful. I used to add pictures. I used to really make them more visual. And so back then, like I believe in 2021, 2022, because I don't really do infographics these days either, is that, I really wanted to showcase what it looks like to be in a digital classroom. And I think that is very important for me to really make it visual, for me to understand like how do we really mix art, culture, analysis into these types of education models. And I think it was really cool to see my audience feel like, oh wow, these solutions don't really cost me thousands of dollars. It's actually being done by community members. And I felt so privileged to be able to, showcase my audience like what it means to actually shift from problem identification to solutions, but also to understand that certain solutions may not work in our areas. And I think it was a really great campaign and outlook. And also like, I think that for me, I'm really interested in using visual design and to really putting my work out there on that end. And also, digital media when it comes to YouTube, right? I've been using YouTube for the last 2 years, but my team has been really pushing me to continue pushing videos on there. And it's really interesting to see, the amount of how my original ideas of environmental education have really evolved into larger forms of media. I think that on my end, we really wanted to focus on really capturing longer form videos that talk about these topics. And I think that was really cool to see that a lot of people were interested in learning about these issues. But queer brown vegan today, when people ask me like, what is it, like, what do you do, are you just an influencer? I really refute those claims, because I think that like we are very much rooted in this educational platform that's on independent research team, and we're a content creation specialist. Is that we operate as a very small company. There's only 3 people that work for me, and I think that it's important to understand that the levels of issues that we have to face as a small company is that how do we really make ourselves experts in these industries? And to be honest, I think that as a brown person, someone who's queer, I've had to fight very hard in my industry to be seen as an expert, or to be seen as a public speaker. There's never such a day that I've gone to events and people say, I didn't know you could speak that well. Like, how did you learn to speak so well in English? Or, a lot of things that have come up for me where it's like, how do you know this knowledge? Like, everything that you write, it seems like you're a scientist. And I said, well, I actually studied environmental science. And I think that it is very hard. I don't really talk about the really hard things I've gone through, but the amount of racism that I've experienced in international, both UK climate spaces, Canada climate spaces, European and US climate spaces, there's never such a day that I go where people are just constantly questioning me. But yet I have friends who are white in this space that have no degrees, no research experience, and they're seen as experts. And I think that goes to show, like, on my end, the amount of how we really need to do better to unlearn these types of oppressive behaviors on people. And so building a career in the environment is actually interesting, is that today young people, is that you don't need to work at an environmental NGO. What's really popular now, from what I've heard in UK space and also US, is consulting, right? There's a lot of job opportunities here in the US, but also in the UK, where you can consult. And I think that there's a lot of really cool opportunities for young people that are coming in. But I think that the number one advice I always give to young people too is that you need to be able to network. You need to be able to go beyond the grades, the resume. You actually have to build with people. Um, I always make this really funny joke, is that my communications manager who works with me now, he was my assistant back in 2021, is he actually DM'd me when I said I was looking for an assistant, and he said, oh, like, he was working for this UK climate organization at the time, and he messaged me and he said, oh, I want to. And I said, okay, can you send me your resume? And he's like, I don't have a resume. And I'm like, okay, well, this is this is like, I was like, okay, I don't know if this is a good fit. But anyways, I ended up interviewing him regardless of a resume or not. And he ended up creating a resume. And it was really amazing to see how knowledgeable this person was. And so I think that that's really cool to see that, young people don't ever be afraid to shoot your shot in these industries. But I think that, as my career has evolved, we've gone more into longer form media content, and that's actually creating independent web series. For me, what I have found value in creating long form media is that it's a story. It's something that's a 30-minute episode. I've been very inspired about TV shows, and I said, why don't you create your own TV episodes and just make them about you talking about environmental knowledge? So the original concept ideas of like talking about, like, what is urban ecology, or what is climate optimism, what is environmental justice, those ideas stemmed into then blossoming into this idea I have today, is like actually saying, let's actually go to the expert and talk about the issues and solutions happening on the ground. And it's been so amazing to see that, I've only produced 2 episodes, but I actually have the third one coming out very soon. The fourth one and fifth one were already shot and they're being edited now. Is that this started off as a very pilot idea. And it's funny because the first episode on the left, this professor named Dr. Ellen Kelsey, she emailed me randomly about a year and a half ago, and she says, I want to learn how to use social media and grow my audience. Can you help me? And I was like, wait, an old person wants me to work with them? And she actually funded the first episode of the web series, and she was the one who saw the vision. And actually, I thank her to this day, because of her vision to help me fund this idea, it helped me get other funders to fund other episodes. And I think that you only need, like I said, one person to invest in your idea. Obviously, I don't know if this is going to work. Maybe Oliver, if you can unmute yourself, you can let me know if it's not going to do that. But
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. You can
thank you.
try.
This is just a preview of, like, what we're doing. Is the audio playing?
Yeah, it's a bit choppy, but I think we can manage it.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Okay, yes. Anyways, that's just a preview of the intro. But anyways, I want you all. I definitely, if you're ever interested in watching it, go on YouTube. The first episode was actually shot really bad, and I ended up I have editors now and a production team, and they help me with a lot of those things. But I always say, put your work out there, even if it's not pretty, even if it's not that good. Like honestly, I didn't know that that video now today has like 1,300 people who have watched the video, and I think that's really cool for someone who doesn't have a large audience on YouTube. And I feel like people to this day comment and like they like that video, and I feel like you never know who's gonna see your video, because actually from those videos that I posted, I've gotten work opportunities, new friendships that are out of it. So, like I said, the internet is a very unique place. But the last thing actually I want to maybe this would maybe help young people today is the things that we're doing today is that beyond the content creation and like this is the work that I'm doing, I'm actually have this very surprising announcement for you all. Is I co-founded this project. It's called the Symbiocene, and it's very rooted in this grassroots collective. You can see here the little infographic that's going off. We just launched yesterday, but this is actually a pilot that was launched last year. Is that we really have felt that environmental events are becoming a bit boring in our view. And we found it that we really want to create a space for one, young people and change makers, activists, and artists to come together to really explore not just what nature is or climate justice is, but really how do we connect different movements together. And the symbiocene came out of this idea that was coined by Dr. Glenn Albrecht to talk about a period where species come together, create symbiotic futures, and it really collapses narratives around the Anthropocene. And it was really interesting to see that, because I think for me as a young person, I often have felt that not being heard at these environmental conferences. They're very exclusive, they're very expensive to attend. And so for us, we launched the Symbiocene back in London, actually, in last June during London Climate Week. And it was funny because we did this as a panel event. It was like a music thing. And it was very cool to see how we were going to do it. And it was interesting because off of that idea, we went to Climate Week New York City, and then we went to Dubai and COP28. And it was very, it got a lot of success. And we just said, we're going to create a team. And so, first of all, our graphic designer is so amazing. She knows how to design really well. But we really just wanted to showcase that, like, for us, the Symbiocene isn't just about, being cool. It's actually exploring different conversations that people want to hear. Is like, how do we connect astrology into climate? How do we connect pretty how do we talk about pretty privilege in movement spaces and deconstructing whiteness? How do we really have more critical dialogues and discourses? And it's really interesting because we have arts performances and musicians performances. On you see on the bottom, you'll see that this was the Leanna Flores, the artist. She was the singer in our program. And then on the right side, it was during Climate Week New York City when we watched this short film for a few minutes. And it was such a huge success that a lot of people really wanted to learn about how they can build with us. And this is our older branding that we had, because we recently updated it and changed it. But I felt that it was really needed for people to evolve in that space. But I think that an important announcement that I wanted to share with you all is that we actually are bringing the summit to London in June. We have our venue confirmed. I can't share too much details with you, but if you are invested and interested in being a volunteer, you can email me about that. I will send you the volunteer form, but we are actually looking for people who are interested in working with us. On that end, we are in the process of fundraising and just really creating our team. And so, if you're a young person that's just looking to get connected to just build, but also to learn how events are being produced, definitely this is a very rare and unique opportunity, just because I don't really extend it to younger people out there. But we are building out this event, and it's fun to see how an idea that started off with my best friend Kalpana, that's based in London from Nowadays on Earth. She and I had this dream of working together back in 2021, but we both agreed that it wasn't time to build yet. It wasn't time to for us to create an event. So it was until 2023 that we were like, actually, now we are ready to build. And I think that was really cool to see the amount of community that showed up and people who were invested in this event. But I think we're going to go into questions and answers since I've been, I think, speaking for almost an hour. But you can definitely follow me at Career Bound Vegan or email me if you have more opportunities.
So you mentioned earlier about like the need to embrace multidisciplinary and nuanced learning for young people, especially in ages where we're confronting so many interconnected and wicked problems. I was wondering what you see, I guess, the role of higher education, specifically universities and colleges in that, because I know several colleagues at King's who have this struggle where they have this amazing internal passion to really disrupt the silos that exist in the institution and many other institutions. But then also they're also fighting against those very institutions that make that kind of work quite difficult. And I think universities are an interesting space to reflect on this complicated structural problem. But I think it would be nice to hear from your own experiences as a content creator, as a student, and so on. What you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for young people to understand, like, the institutions, there's a lot of problems in them, but within the institution, there's a lot of great people that are trying to change it.
Mm.
And so I cling on to the people who are trying to change it while also understanding that messiness that they have to work through, because I don't want to come off and say, oh, academia is horrible and it should be canceled, although that it is important for us to understand that institutions definitely have a lot of issues and funding that needs to be diverted. I think it's important for young people to find mentorship of grad students or professors that can create allyship with them, because one is that the more that you speak about it and the more that you connect with others through it, you validate yourself that you're not alone. And I think that what I often have seen is that young people try to young people, even myself at one point, think I'm all alone, I've been doing this all myself, and it's like that's untrue. There's been a lot of people who have come before me who have done really great work and who have been trying to change it. And I think that it's important that we acknowledge those who have come before us. But I also think that, like, if you're someone that's finding difficulties within the same barriers of the institution, is like, what are things that have helped you become to build outside of that? And I think that one of those when I was in college is actually working with local organizations outside the institution that are connected to the institution to create teach-ins. And teach-ins were more focused on understanding the local issues that were happening on that area and how the university was funding something and how, students can influence policy decisions within the own student body or to get people to sign. And I think that those are really pivotal moments, because I felt that that was really a way for university students to use their privilege and access to have, but also to understand that a lot of us that were in universities are also can vote locally technically. And so I think that, like, those were things that I have found. And the last thing I would just say is that, like, we need to be able to also really work with grassroots organizations to build curriculum outside. Is that I feel that a lot of grassroots organizations already have curriculum built. I think that the thing is that, like, we find it really hard to get that into classrooms specifically, because I think that it's not seen as important enough. But I think that there are some professors or grad students or even clubs that you can bring this as a weekly topic. One thing I share is that at the Students of Color Environmental Collective is that when we were trying to learn something, like, let's say we were learning about the term climate migration. This was years ago when it started coming out in, like, this new word. We sat down, we actually read articles together, and then we discussed those articles about what it means to be a climate migrant. And I said, okay, so it means that someone who is displaced from their country due to climate change. And so I think that that really allows for opportunities to kind of build that knowledge. I think that's where I would suggest people to start versus trying to look at this whole large systemic thing and being like, I have to change it myself, because then that means that you carry a lot of pain and burden through that experience.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. All at the same time, there are two comments and a person put the hand up. So I'll go for the person with the hand up just for the sake of it. So yeah, Pim, feel free to ask your question.
Hi. So thank you so much. I'm so glad that you came to talk at King's. I was just going to ask, as a young climate activist myself, and I do like public speaking things, I find it really hard to find a balance between speaking in spaces where I know I'm going to be like pushing boundaries, but also being tokenized and not being compensated for my work. So do you have any tips for like managing this and kind of, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the best tips I always tell young people is that we have a different market. In the US, we get paid more. I talked to some of my UK climate friends, and I share this story not to name anyone, but like I was a friend that works at a charity was inviting me to speak, and they were like, "We have 10 pounds for you," and I was like, isn't that like 20? I said it's fine. You don't need to pay me. Like it was honestly fine. I didn't care about the payment. I just was like, okay, I'll do it for you for free because you're my friend. But I think that one thing is I tell young people is that you can't help others if you can't help yourself first. So if you're willing, there's only some people who are willing to negotiate themselves to be in those spaces where they're going to be tokenized, and they find that one funder, that one person that's going to continue showing up for them consistently. I have found that like when younger people are like, you know, everyone deserves to be paid. I pay all my people. I pay, for this event that we're doing, we're trying to pay all our speakers. Like we're like we there's no such thing as no one's gonna do this for free. But I think that it is important for us to really understand like what are you trying to get out of it, right? If there's certain spaces where you're like, oh, this speaker is going to be here and this person's going to be here that's a climate change denier, no, don't subject yourself to violence. But if you're like, oh, I kind of have to play the game here and to really dance around so I can help my other friends, then yes, do it. I think that you are in a position of privilege, and I think that's what I did it when I was younger, is that I had to recognize that like, okay, I want to help 5 of my youth climate activist friends that never get speaking gigs. But if I don't put myself and build that relationship with that people, how am I going to get those young people into those positions so I can get them paid opportunities? And so I think that I see it as a way of like long-term thinking versus like people are like, well, I'm only doing if it's paid, and they don't help other young people. And it's like, okay, well then I think we have to also normalize sharing rates, is that young people need to ask like, how much are you getting paid? How much should I charge? I think that is important for young people today, is to be transparent as possible. And I know it can sometimes be a very uncomfortable conversation, but look, here's a fun fact. If Al Gore here in the United States that did the Inconvenient Truth can get paid 50,000 USD for a keynote, then a lot of young people can also get paid for that. It is ridiculous to see that all these senators, these like rich politicians getting paid thousands of dollars to speak, to regurgitate the same thing. But a young person that has a new perspective, that has new originality, that has new advice to the world is seen as like, oh, you should be thankful for speaking here. It's like, I get it. It is so frustrating. And I think that I always tell young people is that to network, but also to keep your peace at mind. And also don't overbook yourself, because Earth Month is usually that time when you get activists get burnt out. So I always say keep it balanced as much as possible.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Amazing. And then Gladys in the chat, I think this might have been when you're talking about maybe high school or university education, but they're asking, would it be better to have environmental science as a subject for high schools?
I love this question. So in the United States, I'm not sure how it is in the United Kingdom, but in the United States, high schoolers, there's a it's called AP, which means AP stands for college level.
Right.
And AP level courses, whatever, like give you good graduation credits or whatever. But basically, it's called AP Environmental Science. Unfortunately, that's a very exclusive elitist way to not you saying that, but like it sucks that high school does this. I do agree that I think that there should be environmental science taught. And I didn't take it, unfortunately. So when I chose my major, I just chose it because I had friends who told me that it is a holistic major. And I also Googled environmental science and what you do, and I thought, oh, it's about people on the planet. I forgot that you had to take math and science classes, which weren't my strongest suit, but I got through them. But I think that I really regret I regret maybe not planning myself more carefully to choose a major that I think was more aligned to what I do today. But I think I'm very grateful for environmental science regardless. But I think high schoolers should definitely be taught this because it helps them inspire. I think what's happening in the United States is that climate change is being seen as a very controversial topic. And so a lot like in Florida, for example, they banned climate change education. They introduced this model called Prager University, and it's like really like it's like outright education. It's really insane. It's literally teaching young kids that like horrible things, that solar energy is bad for you, and there's a lot of really messed up things in those curriculum models that I've seen through friends, and it's implemented through the Florida's public school education, and that's where I think that we are headed towards that authoritarianism that we have to really push back. And that's why I encourage a lot of young people to be like, do be on media, because a lot of us are losing the battle globally.
Yeah, that is pretty terrifying. And I know states like Florida also, they have these bans on critical race theory and other interconnected issues. It's quite, yeah, that's, well, there you go. And to that's response, it's such a big, like, oh my God. Anyway, so Jennifer is asking, you mentioned centralizing and decentralizing yourself from issues. Jennifer's never heard of that term before, and they were wondering if you could talk about a bit more about it.
Yeah, no, I love that question. I think what I meant from centering and decentering myself is that I think that as activists, sometimes we feel that like, we have to say something, or we have to, or when is the right time in certain spaces to say about our experiences. So basically what I'm saying is that I had times where I didn't know when I should speak about my experience and when I shouldn't. And I think that it's important to understand like how privilege works, is that if I was in certain spaces where it was majority of Black environmentalists speaking about their experiences, I know how to decenter myself of saying this is not a conversation about brown environmentalists. This is a conversation about Black environmentalists and their struggles towards liberation. That means that as an ally, I can show up to say, I see you and I hear you. However, I'm going to decenter myself and my experiences because it does not apply in this situation that me as a brown environmentalist relating directly to a Black environmentalist experience. And so I think that there's different situations in where I think a lot of us sometimes say, "Oh, we have to be in here," or like, "I have to say something." It's like sometimes you don't. And I think that for the majority of my younger years, I actually stayed very quiet, to always listen and to learn from other people and saying, "Oh, this person needs to be centered. This person needs to be centered. I don't need to be centered in this space." I do think that there comes this way where we then shame ourselves that we shouldn't speak. But what I'm saying is that there's a time and place to be speaking and centering your experiences, and there's times where you just don't need to be centering everything that you're saying.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers that was answered your question, Jennifer. Brilliant. And then Clarice is asking, so they really liked they rely a lot on social media accounts to learn about climate ecology and equality issues. But how do you think it can really reach new people? They feel like the social bubbles created by algorithms could stop new people from discovering accounts about such topics, especially with an intersectional lens. And how have you reached out to those audiences, I guess, beyond at the echo chamber?
Yeah, no, I love this. I think that's an issue that we've been talking in our team, is that, we have to reach new audiences in terms of like not just for growth, but reaching new audiences that typically wouldn't be exposed to us. And I think that comes down from like other theories of change, is that we really wanted to focus on how people can really understand themselves through an experience. So a lot of that is actually creating new content that's not focused on education. Some of it's very comedic, some of it's very poetic. I think one of the things that helps queer brown vegans still stay more, I guess, relevant in the spaces these days is that we really try to redesign new stories. So one thing is actually I'm creating my own new web series that's a scripted televised web series. It's independent, but it's basically poking fun and creating a storyline of actors, right? I'm working with actors on this and friends who have acting experience to create a series that's not focused on climate change, but has the central theme around climate. And obviously I'm in the process of like gonna be brainstorming this and shooting it these upcoming months. But basically I think that it's a very unique experience for a lot of people to know that there's different ways for you to reach it, whether that's through beauty, whether that's through food, whether that's through not Twitter, but through X or through YouTube, through gaming, like using platforms like Twitch. I think that it's important for a lot of people to try different platforms and to try different voices versus trying to create like, the same account. I mean, I think infographic accounts are still amazing. I think people should still create them. I think when I first started them back in 2019, they were on the rise of, well, they're already popular. So that's why, and they still are popular today. Do not get me wrong. But I think that for me, I really wanted to understand like, okay, how do we tell more stories beyond Instagram and TikTok? And I think I have really tested different forms of videos, different forms of knowledge, different forms of skits and comedic acts to get new people. And I think I have definitely have found that newer audience. I just think that it takes a longer time to engage with them. So I think if you're someone trying to build outside of echo chambers, I always say look into different movement spaces in racial or social justice spaces. Like I think that that's where Symbiosine is really for us, like that gateway to we're not calling it a climate festival, we're not calling it an environmental festival, we're calling it a opportunity on that end. So I think that it's an ongoing thing with algorithm suppression, but I also think that there's ways to navigate through it. But I also want to acknowledge that it is a very still messed up algorithm. So I think it's a constant conversation to have.
Yeah, definitely. And I am quite, it always gets me excited when I see it could be a post, it could be a news account on social media, but someone who is trying to clearly sow, I guess, the seeds of environmental or social justice thinking, but in a way that isn't so explicit. And both explicit and implicit have their purposes and spaces. But I think increasingly to get those, especially who may be sort of on the fence, they're not sure if this really for them, if you can actually reach that story out to them and make it personal and local, then that can go extremely far. So yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, thank you for the question as well. I have another question, which was around, so I'm a bit biased here because I follow your work quite a lot, both from a personal and academic sense. And I know you've done, there's a reel somewhere on your Instagram or on YouTube where you're speaking with Kamala Harris from the Biden administration, and you're talking about you're demanding sort of environmental justice education in K-12 education, if I remember correctly. What is that? And could you tell us more about that quite unique events? Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, so you're asking about my experience? Sorry, are you asking about my experience at COP? Sorry.
So it was with Camilla Harris. There was some like roundtable with people. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that honestly, I'll tell you all this story. So basically, like in 2021, climate influencers we were scouted by this climate nonprofit that invited select few of us to go to the White House to learn about the Inflation Reduction Act. They never told us that we were going to meet Biden and Harris, actually. So like I have the original email. It just said that you're invited to the White House. And I said, oh, I'm going to go because I've never gone into the White House. I'm like, this is cool. And I did not think much of it because I said, oh, the White House doesn't really care about like, environmental things. The Inflation Reduction Act is huge, I guess, in the Hill. But I was like, I think we're going to talk to like, Gina McCarthy, who is like the former head of Environmental Protection Agency or environmental during the Obama administration. And so when they had us in this really weird room and like we were just sitting there and there was Secret Service there. I always detail this a very weird experience is that I have really been very critical of obviously of like the US government, their involvement of funding, genocide and other fossil fuel industries. And when we were sitting down, we started talking about climate policy. And out of nowhere, Kamala first comes in and I'm just very shocked that like she would come in. And so anyways, we did not know she was going to come in. So I did not have any time to prepare a question. It was literally that she stepped in, she says any questions. There was literally 10 hands up because there was a large group of us. I rose my hand very quickly to try to get a question around education environmentalism. And it was very funny because I think the response was very poor. I asked her, I said, how do we protect environmental justice education when climate is becoming a very politicized issue and it's being banned? And she said, we have to demand it. We have to demand. And then people got mad at me, my followers, because they said, demand it from who? Like, she's literally the vice president. And so I think it kind of came to this conversation where it's like, I think what I would have wanted is that there needs to be protection through systemic legislation and law to ensure that climate education is going to be institutionalized and that it cannot be banned. But instead, I think that it was very hard to say, well, like the community needs to come together and fight for it. When in reality, I think that like what needs to also happen is that in our public school settings for K through 12 education here for young kids is that they're being massively defunded in their state governments. And I think that's where we're running into that issue. So I think on my experience, it was a very interesting time to like meet her. And you know, I think that like I never would have thought to have gotten that interview, but it was a very quick thing that happened. And I think that you know, like it's they have to give a PR response most of the time. So I'm sure that they had to, you know, strive away from certain language. But I also know that I don't think I would ever be invited back to the White House again after my statements around supporting, you know, Palestine and everything that's been happening globally.
What do you think about, I guess, the future of environmental education in a world of what is often called polycrises or multiple crises and that kind of thing? That could be your own platform, or it could be just in more broader senses with other people you've and accounts that you engage with and so on. Yeah, what do you think about the future? Very broad. You could do a PhD on this, but yeah, just leave it like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in some truth, yes, things are getting very much harder in polycrises. I think that what I hope to see is that even if things get very rough in our democracy, in our hometowns, in our environments, in our political states, is that our community becomes more stronger. Something that we have been seeing is that also like the resistance that has been happening around college campuses has been very powerful and big. I mean, I think that on my end, I have to look back at what's happening right now with students protesting against the genocide in Palestine in U.S. college campuses. Like, there's over 18.5 million students enrolled in universities and colleges, and a large portion of those students are mobilizing around that. And I think that to me, it showcases that solidarity still exists. The trueness still exists. The freedom of speech needs to exist. And I think that's what really threatens a lot of governments and the elite is that despite how much wealth they can accumulate, despite how much wealth they could try to do PR to smear and to, you know, attack us and to say horrible things about us, is that community will always prevail. And I think for me, like that's where I feel that in activist spaces, that's where I get my strength from, is that it's a collective force that is fighting together. It's like the stronger that we are together, the more resilient that we are to face these issues together versus this idea of like, I can't do anything and this is what my life is going to become.
That's really nice. Thank you. And then my final question, and again, if anyone has any of their own, feel free to post them or raise your hand. That was looking to the future. Now we're going back. I didn't plan it like this, but there you go. So like looking back, do you wish you were taught anything differently within school? So this is before applying to do certain subjects, but this is like your sort of mandatory curriculum and that kind of thing. Are there certain topics or ways of being taught and learning that you wish you had when you were younger?
I think I wish I asked more questions when I was younger. To be honest, I always felt embarrassed amongst my activist friends and also professors to ask any questions. And I feel like this comes from this idea of one, Western science models are very rooted in superiority and hierarchical models, where it's like you're not seen as like that's a dumb question, right? They'll say that. But within activist spaces, the reason why I felt that way is I had really bad experience with certain activists and environmental spaces that made me feel when I was younger that they were just like, I don't need to teach you this. You should learn this for yourself. I'm burnt out and I'm tired. And I think that it's true that certain frontline activists already have a lot of large burden over themselves. But I also think that like, you know, there needs to be people who are going to be willing to teach those people too. And I think that's why I love the role as an educator, is that I feel like I'm the gateway between those who are entering their activism and also going to continue. And I think that like it is a very rough space for a lot of us to understand that nothing is perfect. Everyone, like I am not exempt from making mistakes, but I'm also like, you know, I'm not perfect either. I'm a human too. So I think there's that on that end. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And please reach out to me if you have any questions. And thank you so much, Oliver, for having me here. It's truly a privilege. And please feel free to stay in contact. I will be in London in June if you'd love to meet. So also please to buy a ticket for the Symbiosis when it comes out very soon. We'll be launching that very soon. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll definitely share that around as much as we can. And literally, I will move mountains to get that shared around. It sounds amazing. And yeah, and I'm forever grateful for this webinar too. So yeah, thank you very much for everyone for coming.